Hey guys, welcome back. Weston again with Outworld. I could not be more excited to share this next project. We've been waiting for it for a long time. In conjunction with Black Mountain Motorworks, this 2025 Lexus GX550. Not a big surprise why we've been so excited to get our hands on this. Lexus absolutely knocked this design out of the park. I think it's one of my favorite SUV designs, not only by Lexus, but of any manufacturer in history. I've been following along since the initial announcement of the GX550, and now that I've seen it in person, I have to say it's exceeded every expectation that I had. As you may know, the Lexus GX550 was co-launched with the Toyota Land Cruiser, same body on the same T and GAF shared platform, but there's a couple key differences, some more obvious than others. First, the front fascia. I may be biased because I saw the GX550 first, but after I saw the Lexus, how cohesive the design was with the body lines, the Land Cruiser front fascia almost seems like an afterthought. Both of them are excellent looking vehicles. Just from a design aspect alone, I have to give the edge to the GX550. On the power plant side, the main difference between the Toyota Land Cruiser and Lexus GX550 is that the Lexus comes with a 3.4 liter twin turbo V6, whereas the Land Cruiser comes with two variations of the 4-cylinder currently. And you'll see this overall in the market, especially with Toyota. It seems that everybody's dropping 2 cylinders, so former V8s are now V6s. 6 cylinders are now 4 cylinders. To make up for that, we're bringing in hybrid powertrains, forced induction through turbo and supercharger. I think there's a larger conversation to be had about the longevity of these engines for our community in overland and off-road. They may work for simple commuters. I think my concern is going to be in a couple years out as we start adding, as we do, 1,000 pounds on top of the vehicle, driving it in abnormal conditions. Over time, I'm wondering how those smaller displacement with forced induction engines are going to handle that kind of abuse. The positive person in me thinks that Toyota engineers have figured that out and accounted for that. And so as a classic no replacement for displacement guy, I'm cautiously optimistic that this Lexus is going to be running for a long time, even after we use it the way that it's intended. As for the build itself, this may not be a big surprise to some of you, but we are ready to hit the ground running. And in fact, some of the components going on this build have never hit the market yet. So in many ways, it's going to be the first GX550 equipped this way. I cannot wait to see how it turns out. Let's get started. With the GX550 being so new, I'm not sure if suspension will be ready by the time it's back from CBI, so for now we're going with 285/70s to start. The setup we chose for this build is General Tire's Grabber X3 mud terrains wrapped around 1552's Range HD, 17-inch diameter, 8.5-inch width, 0 offset. We're expecting this setup to poke out a little bit more from the fenders than we'd like without a lift, but optimistic it'll look right at home when it's finished. It also helps when this goes to Idaho tomorrow for bumper development to ensure it's clearing a little bit more than the stock setup. The truck was delivered to CBI's headquarters in Idaho Falls, where it will spend the next 3 months. For the first time, you're getting a peek inside the design and development of the GX550 at CBI. 12 weeks of work condensed into just a couple minutes. Shout out to Michael at CBI for capturing all of this footage for us. Utilizing the latest in scanning technology, the team at CBI is removing the bumpers, scanning both the factory components and the bumperless body to ensure these prototype bumpers don't interfere with the existing components behind them. Sliders and skid plates are the easier items on the agenda, as Toyota and Lexus have been generous in recent generations. With factory mounting locations on the frame rails for the sliders, and a relatively simple measuring exercise to bring the skid plate system to life. With the final fit and assembly, we're also adding LED lights front and rear powered by an S-Pod and a Warn winch added in the front bumper. Now it's time to ship this bad boy back to Denver and continue the work. After 3 long months, the GX550 is back from CBI and back into true automotive for the suspension lift. Standing by are General Tires Grabber X3s and 35x1250s to round out the new setup. At the time of filming, the Overtrail trim hasn't had a full suspension developed, so we're going with Peak Suspension's front and rear spacer lift. Developed first for the Land Cruiser 250, this is the first time it will be mounted to a GX550. The spacer kit offers 2.75 inches of lift in the front and 1 inch in the rear. The front struts require disassembly to load the preload spacer. After snaking the electrical connection back up the coil, the strut is reassembled. With the front struts reinstalled, it's time to upgrade the upper control arms. Camberg's UCAs bring heavier duty hardware and increased alignment opportunity, coming in handy for this lift in 35s. As you can see, the driver UCA through bolt is blocked from removal by itself, so we have to unplug the battery and unbolt some components to allow it to come out. Expecting a fair bit of rub, what looks like a simple body mount protective bracket in the rear of the front wheel wells has to go. For the rear spacers, it's as simple as compressing the springs, throwing the spacer on top, and uncompressing to seat it. And perhaps the most useless thing caught on camera for this video, swapping the 33-inch General Grabber X3s for 35-inch General Grabber X3s. Nonetheless, here you go. One of my favorite moments in these projects is dropping the lift to finally see what the final stance will be. In development for the past several months, this is the first time the Rhino Rack Recon Platform will be installed on a GX550. Not needed if you have an extra pair of hands, but having a hoist like this is a definite advantage for uninstalling the factory rack and positioning the Recon platform when it's installed. Rhino Rack had already developed the Recon deck bar for use on their truck bed systems. The mad scientists out of Sydney decided to build a full-length, vehicle-specific rack system around those bars, and the result is the all-new Recon Platform. Featuring an angular wind fairing design, two-tone fascia on the side rails, easy no-drill DIY install, and unique aesthetics, this is by far my favorite rack system out for the GX550 and Land Cruiser 250. Install is pretty straightforward. The holes on the aluminum Recon deck bars are not pre-threaded, but the self-tapping bolts make assembly an easy task with a power drill. The Recon platform mounts to the 6 existing factory mounting points towards the rear, and it features 2 additional legs at the front that press against the body. You'll need to cut a small section of the weather stripping to accommodate. With the Recon platform on, this thing is looking better than I had imagined. All that's left now is outfitting the tailgate and a special treat on the exhaust. Well, we're back at True Automotive for a third and final time with the first ever GX550 install of MagnaFlow's new Catback Exhaust system. This is a straightforward removal and bolt-on install. Clamps are supplied to avoid any welding. We weren't able to reinstall the CBI transfer case rear plate without modification. For now, we'll leave it off as there's no protection stock, and we'll look at modifying the plate later to get it back in. Before the clamps are set, it takes a bit of shimmying and positioning to ensure adequate clearance of the cross member and other components to avoid any rattling. Now with the install done, it's time to hear this thing purr. The exhaust sounds great right out of the gate, but it's going to improve over time as the system understands the new setup. We're here now at one of our last stops in Golden, Colorado, Free Spirit Recreation, to install their latest Aspen V2 rooftop tent. I've always loved the clamshell style tents, and I think it's right at home on this build. Their mounting brackets make this fairly easy, but since we have some heavy duty tools available to us, we're going to measure, remove the crossbars from the rack, install the brackets and tent, then reinstall as a single assembly, dropping the tent right into place on the Recon platform. And just like the hoist at Rhino Rack, a forklift might not be in your toolbox, but we're sure as hell using it here. Free Spirit Recreation also has their own crossbars that mount to the rooftop tent. Those extend some of the carrying capability that we lost by the tent covering the entire rack. And with those, we're going to be mounting our Max Tracks. And with the successful install of the rooftop tent, we're onto the tailgate. All right, with the rest of the components done, we've arrived at the last chapter of this build, at least for now, before our first trip to Moab tomorrow. It's the tailgate build out, and if you've seen some of my previous builds, you're going to see a lot of familiar elements. Not reinventing the wheel here. I've seemed to have dialed in the components that I feel that I need on these trips, and it's shining through on this build as well. So overall, you're looking at the ARB 064 quart fridge, just single zone. Goal Zero, I'm going to go into this in a minute, but this is the Yeti Pro 4000. Over here are the front runner, just cargo boxes that I've used from the earlier G-Wagon build that I've done. I've just kind of popped them over on this. And then for charging, I have the Nomad 400. With great power comes great responsibility. So the earlier Nomads just don't really put a dent in charging for this thing. I'm going to get into the Escape remote kit in a minute and how powerful that is. But in the times that I'm not moving the vehicle for a couple days at a time, this is really going to come in handy. So the ARB fridge, this is their newer generation. It's been around for quite a few years now, but if anybody remembers the old gray and blue one, we started in that generation and they've just upped their game in every way. Have never seen a need to move off of them, and I'm glad to have them along on this build. If you've seen my prior builds, you know Goal Zero is usually riding along in the tailgate. This is no different. So I've had the 400 to the 1500 to the 3000. This is the new Yeti Pro 4000, and it's upped its game in every way, from power potential to external form factor to UI, everything. Also, another key component to this in charging was I used to have the car link kit for the old Yeti that went straight to the battery and gave me about 10 times the juicing power on charging than if I were to plug it into the wall. They have now upped their game in that and re-envisioned that into what's called the Escape Kit. The Escape Kit is the same exact functionality, just supercharging your battery, but also you get a remote heads-up display in your cab. That's what we're looking at here. I just haven't mounted it yet, but full display on your data for charging, port control, and things like that. Just as simple as hookup. It's just routing it under the channels and into the battery. Just with time of the essence right now, we're going to hit that afterwards, and this is going to be a 3-day trip, so I don't imagine I'll put a dent in this 4000. Outside of that, we have the front runner boxes. You guys have seen these in the G-Wagon build that I did, and I literally just picked those up out of that, and I've plopped them in here. They're stackable. They seem to hold their rigidity well, and one of them is my recovery and kind of everyday use stuff, and then the other is my cooking gear. In the times that I'm not moving a vehicle for a couple days and I can't take advantage of the Escape Kit and drawing power from the battery as I drive, the Nomad 400 is where that comes in. If I had anything less, it's really not putting a big dent in this Yeti 4000. So being able to set this up at camp, this thing is a beast. So any of those times where you just find the perfect site and you're there for 3 or 4 days, you pop this sucker on and at least it's tending that battery and minimizing the draw. And right now, these things are just kind of loosely plopped in on top of the OEM textured tailgate floor. I'm going to go one step further and build out a mounted platform to house all of this, and it could come with like a slotted mount system, so everything has a home. There's no moving about, especially when you're going on off-camber trails or washboard roads or something like that. So again, shakedown run, nothing too difficult, but we're going to learn a lot of lessons out in Moab of what to trim. You're going to see a little bit of that on the next section, but also just how well is this tailgate suiting me for this one trip? And where can I improve? That's the nature of the game here. And that's it for phase 1 of the tailgate build. This is more or less the same setup I've ran in several of my previous builds, and by all means, it's served me very well. So again, no need to reinvent the wheel. But the shakedown run should tell me everything I need to know about validating the right products, the right placement, and also what I can do to improve the overall look and feel and rigidity of the system. And with that, it's time for Moab. All All right, guys, we're here in sunny Moab. Been here for the last 3 nights, finally with the first shakedown run of the totally built GX550, and I gotta say, by all rights, the reviews are absolutely stunning, both on and off-road. I've had the privilege of driving this for about 1,000 miles now, and I'm gonna break down some of my reviews and feedback both from the vehicle itself and some of the components that we've added to it. First up, with the peak spacers, just to get the 35s on there, they absolutely did their job. I think for somebody trying to lift it without armor, the peak spacers are going to be just fine. With the front and rear and the 35-inch spare, it's a little softer than I would hope, and there's also some trimming that needs to be done, but we're also anticipating a full suspension setup for this. The Overtrail trim specifically has an electrical connection going to the struts, and we're waiting until a suspension system actually solves for that, so we can swap over to the full suspension, and then only then will we do the trimming, just in case there was extra trimming on this setup that was deemed not needed on the finished one or on the full suspension. So right now you're just having to be tender on the trails. Have ripped off the fenders a couple times. Thankfully they pop back in, but right now it's mostly functional. You just have to be careful about which lines you're choosing. As for the tailgate, the loadout items themselves are serving me well, but the issue that I've also found in the LC250 when we used it in a commercial in July is that the floor is very soft. So the Yeti 4000, from what it looks like, is already caved through the bottom of the floor. That'll need to be replaced. So regardless if you have a fully built drawer system set up, if you plan on putting weight back there, especially if it has points like mounting feet or wheels or something like that, which the Goal Zero does, that all of that weight can kind of center on, I would definitely look at getting some kind of baseboard, birch or something like that that can offset the weight, because I think as soon as I get back into Denver, I'm having to replace that floorboard. One other thing learned both on and off-road is that this thing is definitely in need of a re-gear, especially with this being a twin-turbo V6 and relying on that spooling to really get the power out of this. The gearing kind of delays that timing, especially when you're in 4 high. We did Schaefer switchbacks yesterday, and just trying to chase that spool and that power just seemed really difficult to come by. I'll go into it in a later video, but the Land Cruiser that we'll compare to the GX, the 4-cylinder hybrid, that battery really offsets that power. The LC is also on 35 by 1250s, and having driven both on the road, that battery is a huge difference maker. But I believe with a proper re-gear on this, it'll probably be a little bit more neck and neck than it is right now. For the roof rack, the Recon Platform by Rhino Rack has been my favorite look and feel for both the LC and the GX by far on the market. It's been by and large pretty quiet on its own, but as soon as the FSR tent went on there, I'm actually surprised at how non-existent the noise is, even on the road with crosswinds. And the tent just seems to fit perfectly on the rack, which is what I'm looking for, a nice cohesive setup. As for the tent itself, this has got to be one of the nicest night's sleep that I've had over the last 3 nights. So it's an air inflatable mattress, which previously I used to bring on top of like my auto homes and my ARBs. This one is built in. That's your base setup, and then there's also a cloud topper that FSR has given me, and as a side sleeper, that's proven to be seriously one of the most comfortable nights of sleep I've had. Another issue, which is pretty well documented by this point, is the size of the gas tank. So if you're hitting frequent gas stations along the way, it's not as much of an issue, but with being off trail and everything, you really have to keep it in the back of your mind, is when you're coming back into town, when are you going to fuel up next? Rotopacks, we have two gallons on the back, especially at 12.5 miles per gallon right now that we're getting on this full setup. You've got to really be conscious about where your fuel gauge is at all times. I'm sure Long Range America or somebody else will be coming out with an additional fuel tank, but in the meantime, something to keep in mind. As for the interior, I think Lexus did a perfect job of trying to blend off-road kind of minimalism and also trying to add that upper trim on top of the Land Cruiser, and having spent time in both of those interiors, I feel like Lexus kind of nailed it. I've heard some complaints that it's not luxurious enough, especially on the Overtrail. This is kind of what I'm looking for. The look and feel, it's plush, it's cohesive, but it's also just, it's not too in your face. Everything feels good. It's super comfy. I have to say the massage chairs were a big surprise to me. Going in, I thought those were going to be a huge gimmick, but they're legit. And as somebody that kind of angles over in their seat when they're driving, it's pretty funny. It's corrected my posture, so I can end up having the full massage from like spine to butt. But overall, this has been an insanely comfortable ride. Air-cooled seats, heated seats, everything you would expect, just with a couple added bells and whistles for this new model.
Another thing that you'll hear online is the hood lift is pretty apparent over 50 miles an hour. I can confirm that definitely is an issue, but nothing that's making me set off any alarm bells. It seems like it could be latched down a little bit better. How that's fixed, I don't know. It could be a service bulletin that gets posted later, but it is something to note. It is there. As for the size of the vehicle itself, I really love the dimensions of this thing, and I know there's been a big hoorah about the 300 series not being here, but if you look at the sales, it was just overpriced and oversized for the majority of the market. I think dimension wise for both the LC and the GX, they kind of nailed it. It's like a 4Runner plus. Interior wise, you just get a little bit more cargo room, but on the exterior side, it's still nimble on the trails. You're not having to lean on the side of full-size pickup in terms of which trails you can and can't do. So in my opinion, especially for my needs, I think they nailed the dimensions. As for the rear bumper, there's two main features that were affected by that, both the rear backup camera and bird's eye. The rear backup camera obviously is going to have a relocation kit. We're going to look into that shortly, but bird's eye encompasses a few different cameras. So if you were to look at on the dash, the whole back end has a very distorted view of the rear bumper, which impacts really the functionality of that. I'm not sure if there'll be a fix for that. I think it's something we're willing to live with for this build. But the rear backup camera at least will be relocated as soon as we have a solution. Speaking of the feature set, when you're in 4 low, you do have downward facing cameras, so you can kind of see the rocks below you. Another thing that I thought might be a little bit gimmicky, but it's actually proven extremely useful and, if nothing else, extremely entertaining when you're on the trails. Something to be noted about the GX, and I don't think it's particularly limited to GXs, it's more of for all vehicles in general these days, but it's just the tech and the issues that come with them. Most of the time that I've had in the last few weeks with this thing has been limited to like the entertainment section, random disconnects with CarPlay, random prompts asking for passwords and things like that. There's a good chance that we're an update or two away from those being fixed, but part of me thinks as somebody that's very used to analog vehicles, old 3rd gen 4Runners, even the 5th gen with minimal tech, I wonder if this is just the new standard instead of just basic maintenance. Now, tech troubleshooting and bugs and patches is just a new way of life for us moving forward, but time will tell. Overall performance on off-road, I think it's exactly what everybody was hoping for and expecting. It's agile, it's nimble, but it also just has that nice responsiveness, really good plush feel, and they've really struck a balance in between the responsiveness of you feeling your moves off-road, but just kind of feeling like you're in a piece of luxury. And Lexus, you know, with the GX470 and GX460, has the history of knowing how to prove that, but with the net new platform, I've been really impressed in how they've really struck that balance. Overall, just as a platform, I've been in love with this thing since day one, since I first saw the launch commercial, and I'm pleased to say that it's really met or exceeded all my expectations in basically every area. There are a few limitations I think that came just from building this, which is what you're going to run into when you modify vehicles, but I think most of those are going to be offset. Because of the close difference in price between the Land Cruiser and GX, it might be a closer decision than many may think, and so you're going to want to check out my next video if you're on the fence about which vehicle to buy, because I'm going to compare both this GX550 to an equally built Land Cruiser and go through the differences and where the Land Cruiser and the GX may one up the other. And with that, it's really been a pleasure driving this for a couple thousand miles over a span of quite a few weeks, both from stock to completely outfitted, and we're back on the trails right now. So it's been a pleasure sharing this with you. Again, if you have any questions or anything, if I haven't touched on anything, feel free to leave a comment. Be happy to get back to you. And if we haven't experienced what you're asking, I'll go out and try to figure it out for you. But in the meantime, take care. We'll see you on the next one.